Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Improving Talk series. This month, we are covering Agile. And today we have Glenn Gordon speaking about Connections Matter, how to stay agile with remote and distributed teams. The way we work changed dramatically in 2020, and it seems like the business world is still catching up to the new way of work. The dynamics of collaboration and connection are more important than ever, and even as people as no longer co-located. This session explores strategies, approaches, techniques, and tools to keep remote and distributed Agile teams functioning well like teams. Before we let Glenn Gordon speak, I would like to direct everyone to the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen, somewhere around the middle. If you have any questions, please put them in there, and I will hopefully be able to ask Glenn the question at that time, or hopefully very soon afterwards. And take it away, Glenn Gordon.
Great, thanks very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and hello to the night owls out there. Thanks for joining our stream today. As mentioned, my name is Glenn Gordon with Improving, and our session is on how to stay connected, how to stay agile in a connected, disconnected world. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm a senior consultant with Improving. I've been a professional Scrum Master level 1 and level 2. Professional Scrum product owner as well. I've been working with all kinds of teams, small to large, all sorts of clients, small to large. And I've also been a software trainer in part of my career. So I'm really thrilled about technology, but also about the processes, like how people work together and how they connect, which is what was the topic about Agile Month that drew me to putting together this talk for everybody. So I've also got my LinkedIn on this page. Feel free to connect with me, linkedin.com, Glenn Gordon. So you can check me out there. So let's jump into it. So the first thing we're going to start with, why are connections so important to Agile? You know, the concept of being connected as a team, working with your teammates, finding ways to communicate and collaborate. Why is this so important? Where does this find its roots in Agile? And it turns out it really finds its roots in the Agile Manifesto. This was the document that was put together in February 2001. Various folks got together to kind of create a way to build software that was similar to their processes before, extreme programming, Scrum, things like that. And the idea was, let's find a way for individuals and interactions to collaborate instead of us just being, having a problem here with my animation. There we go. So individuals and interactions collaborating over process and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, that sort of thing. So individuals and interactions was one of the key focuses of the Agile Manifesto. So that's why it's important to stay connected and working together in a community. The 12 principles also kind of drive to this as well. These are kind of the thoughts behind the original Agile Manifesto. Out of these, there's quite a number of them that actually reflect the concept of people working together. So you see business people and developers working together daily. You see on the bottom left, the most efficient and effective method of conveying information is face-to-face. So these connections and the way folks work together, very key to be staying connected in the Agile world. The Scrum Guide itself also is a way to look at this as well. A lot of the pillars like transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So if you've got transparency that you are working towards with your process and your work, people have to be able to see that to understand what's happening. And important decisions are made based on the state of the artifacts, the state of the product that you're building, and the ability to connect and look at these things through the mechanism of inspection, where you understand variances, you look for problems, you get together and come up with solutions for those through adaptation. And all of these things are really empowered by folks being as connected as they possibly can be. That's the engine kind of behind everything. You also have the Scrum values, commitment, focus, openness, etc. Again, all those drive towards folks being connected. And there's two sentences I want to call out from the Scrum Guide in addition to those pillars and values. Scrum is built by the collective intelligence of the people using it. Rather than provide people with detailed instructions, the rules of Scrum guide their relationships and interactions. So right there, you see seeds for folks staying connected in a disconnected world. And adaptation becomes more difficult when the people involved are not empowered or self-managing. The Scrum team itself has to adapt. And it's very difficult to adapt if, again, you're not inspecting, and if you're not working together, if you're not connected together. Again, it makes all of these really, really challenging. Now, of course, those things have been around for many, many years, and there have been folks who work on teams remotely, but the numbers shot up incredibly a couple of years ago. We were driven into our homes and out of public space because of the coronavirus and our response to it. So, a lot of people had to overnight pivot from a team that was co-located and had been used to working a certain way together, fostering their relationships, connecting, sharing, walking down the hallway and having a conversation, right? That pivoted to people being online and connected with various tools that we're going to cover later on. But it went from 17% before the pandemic to 44% afterwards. And there's really no sign of this ever swinging back to the low number in the 17% area, because a lot of folks have found that through the tools and techniques and through a lot of things that we're going to cover today, they're as effective, if not more effective, in staying connected and getting their work done and being productive and being successful. So let's talk about why connections matter, right? Because when you are connected with folks, you've got a level of trust with them. You have experience with these folks. You have a comfort level where you're able to open up and share things. And again, this ties back to some of the Scrum values of openness. If you're embedded in an organization and you don't feel connected with your coworkers, it really doesn't matter how good you are at interpreting the business requirements and cranking out software. You're not really getting the best that you possibly could out of the team because of those missing connections. So with these connections comes a great sense of community, right? Folks are learning from each other. Folks are relying on each other. And we're going to see throughout the rest of the presentation, how do people stay connected and how do they feel connected and the value that comes from that. So that's part two. How do people feel connected? So connections themselves are really kind of subconscious. Think about somebody that you feel connected to. Maybe it's your personal life, could be through your work community, could be through family. Think about what experiences that you've had together and help you feel that way. Humans are kind of pack animals. We want to have this sense of belonging. We want to have some shared experiences. And when we have those shared experiences, we build those connections that are not necessarily what brought us together in the first place. You might be hired in an organization because you have excellent technical skills or very good business analysis or something like that. But it's feeling that connectedness with your teammates through the successes that you have over the years and through your shared values and shared interests and that sort of thing. That really builds those connections. Connections are also extremely valuable when you can form them for some very simple things, but then rely on them later when things get a little tough. There's a common parenting advice about how to connect with your kids. I've got 3 kids. They're all out of the house now, so I'm an empty nester. But as they were growing up, I remember hearing this advice pretty early on and taking it to heart. We would form connections I would try to form connections by talking to them in situations that weren't very difficult. We talked during a car ride. We would shoot some hoops. We would go on a hike. We might do a shared project around the house. Maybe you would have a project like this with your kids. Maybe you'd restore a car, or maybe you'd paint a room or something like that. And in all of those activities, there's opportunities to have conversations that keep things sort of at a fairly simple level. You're not necessarily talking about very deep things, very difficult conversations, but it builds that muscle. It builds that connection. It builds that trust. So when you need to have that conversation later, they missed a curfew or there's some trouble in their school or with their friends or something like that, you've got those channels already established and you don't have to start from ground zero with your communications. You can rely on the channels you've already used to connect with your kids and have the conversation that you need to have. And this is true in adult relationships quite a bit. The casual encounters that you have, water cooler chat, that sort of thing, builds those connections, and you're really able to leverage that and use that when you want to have those more difficult conversations, those more meaningful conversations. It's also important to realize that the people that come together in an organization to do the work of the organization are really not to be considered fungible resources. You hear this sometimes. People refer to a resource, we're going to plug in another resource in there, or we're going to put somebody on a team or something like that. These are real people, and it's become even more prevalent when folks were not necessarily in the office, 8 hours a day, 5 hours a week, that they're leading real lives. They have things that are maybe going to call their attention. They may need to let the dog out. They may feel they need to clean up their workspace a little bit. If you get that dirty coffee cup that's sitting on your desk for 3 days, you want to take the opportunity perhaps to carry that down to the kitchen. And what that can do is sort of clear your mind and get rid of the things that are distracting you from making those connections, because you're sort of obsessed with, I have to be focused at work all the time. So taking a step back and relaxing a bit and realizing for the folks that maybe are on your teams, that they have these real lives that they're trying to live in this remote environment. So it's not, they're not going to be plugged in necessarily through an entire workday. They may take a break here and there and that sort of thing. So when you have these sort of opportunities of clearing your mind, it really opens you up to be able to make some new connections with folks. The other thing to call out is connections are not automatic, right? Especially in the disconnected world. If we are sitting side by side with somebody in a room looking at a PowerPoint presentation, we can be pretty comfortable that that other person can see the PowerPoint presentation. But if we're online and I see it on my screen, you may not necessarily see the presentation. There may be some technical difficulties. You may have an older version of a Zoom client or something like that. And those challenges may not be apparent to the folks that you're working with, or you may not be as clued into the challenges that other people are experiencing when they're trying to participate in an online meeting. And we're going to cover about more of this later when we talk about tools a little bit, but the connections have to be intentional. Check with the other folks. Can everybody see the slide? Does everybody have a free hour this afternoon to get together and collaborate and talk about something? And try to come at this with some empathy and sympathy. If you've got folks that are dealing with personal issues at home, they may not be as connected on that particular workday as they would be other days of the week or other days of the year. And how do you get that information? You have communication channels open. If somebody is not comfortable checking in and saying, guys, I need to have a little bit more slack today, I'm dealing with a personal issue, then they're feeling stressed because they don't feel like they're maybe as valued at work, and they're feeling like they have to, put their personal life maybe in jeopardy a little bit because they're trying so hard to stay connected. Whereas if, the organization and the connections they've already made have that trust, have that empathy and sympathy, it's much easier for folks to be honest. And when you give folks the opportunity to be honest, they're going to bring back on the days that they're bringing their A game. They're going to go even farther in bringing their best self. So that's also important to realize as well. Okay, so let's jump a little bit into the tools and techniques that we can use to stay connected. So one of the key things that folks took advantage of in moving to a remote work environment is the idea that we have a lot of this technology for people in the office. How do we extend this for people that are disconnected? And there's 3 main aspects of this type of communication that I've categorized here. So one approach is a purely asynchronous approach. I sit down and I have a question about a business process or, a question about something that's coming up in the next sprint. And I may decide to communicate with my teammates by sending an email. So if I send the email, that's more or less asynchronous. I'm firing this off, could be late at night, could be early in the morning. And then, communication is going to come back to me on that same channel. It's not the right channel for sort of immediate things that you might want to check on. And it's sometimes can be a challenge for collaboration because things tend to fall very threaded and you have to scroll all the way to the bottom and see, what started this conversation in the first place. So there are certain situations where it is totally appropriate to have this asynchronous conversation, it shouldn't necessarily be the first one that you gravitate towards in sort of the new way of work. Another mechanism for communication and connection is document collaboration. Sort of something like a SharePoint or an online portal where you have maybe requirements being gathered, or you have images and screen mock-ups being shared, or perhaps it's your definition of done for your Scrum team, and you're trying to collaborate on that. So with this, you would have that document living in some online portal, and then you would go and make some comments on it, make some reviews and modifications to it. So through the various revisions, you have communication happening about, is this particular sentence in the definition of done really necessary? What's the thinking of this particular requirement that's, in a user story or something like that? Which leads into the third asynchronous mechanism, and that's your typical Jira boards or Azure DevOps or something like that, or your other project management tools. And again, the idea is that you're having these connections and this communication through that portal. And you may get notified that something has been changed, but you're not thinking about it as a conversation and a connection that you may be making. The second category would be more like near real-time chat. So this is things where it takes place on a chat session or an instant message or perhaps a Teams channel or something like that. And these are things where it's still written like the asynchronous mechanism, but there's more this aspect of, I'm putting out a statement, I'm making a statement, I'm asking a question, and then I'm kind of watching the screen because I'm seeing, our folks typing back to me. And, you'll see those 3 dots come across when somebody starts to type. So these are a bit quicker than the asynchronous mechanism, but there is still not that complete real time as in the third category. So these are really valuable too, because you are having a conversation, even though there's a bit of a delay between each thing, but it also gives you the ability to keep the context of the conversation right at hand. Sometimes you'll have a chat in person or over the phone, and you forget what you were talking about 3 minutes ago. Why did we come to this? Why do we have this call? So with these near real-time ones, you can kind of scroll through and refresh your memory if you forgot, what maybe you went down a tangent, or you need to return to the original thread or something like that. SMS message, as I mentioned on your text, also falls into a similar category. That's generally more point-to-point and is a little more awkward because it's on your phone. But all of these things give you the ability to stay connected and communicate near real time. And I make a distinction between chat and IM and Teams channels, or the equivalent in something like Slack, is that the Teams channels is generally under one particular topic or subject area, and a chat may be more abstract, ad hoc, if you will. But all of those channels are very effective for building connections and staying connected and communicating in, again, almost near real time. The real-time mechanisms would be something like phone or video conferencing, kind of what we're doing here. However, this is, as a webinar, it's kind of a one-way thing. But if you think back to the times you've been on Zoom calls and phone calls and things like that, there's a real-time aspect to that. And again, for collaboration and communication and connection, that's extremely valuable. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these real-time things and availability and what that all means to folks trying to stay connected. There's another type of tool. I use this. We've used this in a couple of our training classes. It's a tool called Mural, and it gives you sort of a hybrid approach in that it lets you have sort of this document repository, if you will, through the form of maybe sticky notes or other text or visuals that are on the screen. But it almost has this infinite scroll effect where I can zoom into something and read the text on it, but I could also pull way back and get an orientation of where I am. Maybe in one section, it is covering functionality. Maybe in another section, there's a technical discussion. Maybe in a third section, there would be sprint retrospective information that's been captured. And it's an online real-time collaborative tool. So in addition to the document portal or SharePoint type of repository of information that you have there, you can interact with people real time in Mural. You can see their cursors moving around. You can see what they're typing. If you have collaboration sessions where you do maybe a sticky storm for brainstorming ideas, Mural is an excellent tool for that. So I encourage you to check that out. We've used it a lot in our Scrum classes at here at Improving, and it just really makes for a wonderful experience of that hybrid environment where you sort of have information that is staying on the screen, but also you're having that real-time aspect to it. So speaking of collaboration and communication and connection and all those sort of things, let's talk about your availability. So if you're using one of those near real-time aspects of things, it's important to emphasize your the value of you stating your availability in those tools. And it's because of that near real-time aspect, right? If I fire off an email, I don't necessarily expect a response in 2 minutes, maybe in an hour, it could be next week. With these near real-time tools, there is an aspect of using them where your availability will influence the person asking a question. But I don't know if you've ever had the experience of you have a question, you look at your list of contacts online, and you see, oh, so-and-so, oh, they're idle. No, I don't want to ask them. They're not going to respond. Oh, they're out. The other person's out of office. Probably not going to get back to me. Oh, this person's online. They're green. Let's go talk to them. And those things, again, may not be correct. A lot of these things are automatically generated. I may be online, but my computer might be idle. So I'm more than happy to get a question from folks, but I haven't said, explicitly said that in its status or something like that. So when you are proactively setting your status, you're communicating sort of meta, right? In my case, in my Teams channel and Improving, I've got a status update and a screenshot here that I'm presenting a lunch and learn from 1 to 2. So folks know what I'm doing. Some folks use the status here to say, okay, this week I am working, 8 to 3. I'm going to be out of the office the rest of the day. Tomorrow, I may be working 7 to 7. It's a longer day for me. So you can put those in here, and it gives the folks that are trying to reach you a little bit more information about when they can expect a response and that sort of thing. Also, in addition to broadcasting your availability, you can also do that on an individual basis. So if somebody messages you and it's not necessarily a right time for you to answer a question, go ahead and respond and say, hey, can we sync up in 5 minutes? Set yourself a reminder. Maybe set an appointment and say, well, I can't talk now, but let's grab an hour or half an hour after lunch. So go ahead and make that appointment on your calendar, and then it won't get to be 4 or 5 o'clock and you're like, oh, I was meant to get back to this person and I totally forgot. So again, it's a sort of proactive approach to making your availability known to other folks. And then when folks are trying to communicate with you, setting up time to do that. Another feature that I like in Teams for distributed teams is this notify when available. Maybe in the people that I was talking before where I had a question and somebody was out of office and somebody was idle, I'm like, well, I could ask the person who is green, but this might not be the right question for them. And the other person who's idle or they're in a meeting, I don't necessarily want to interrupt them. So I can flag them in Teams at least and say, hey, will you tell me, Teams, when this person becomes available? So when they become available, then I can ask them my question and I'm not feeling like I'm interrupting their work. So this is a technique. It really helps, I think, build communication rather than just firing off IMs and just leaving your status as automatic. There's an intentionality here that really helps to breed the connections. Another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with availability is the time zones, right? And a lot of folks have worked with distributed teams that have folks in various time zones. I know I've worked on teams where I have folks in the UK, I have folks in India, had somebody in Australia. And so that's really a challenge, right? They really wreak havoc on the connections that you're trying to make. And what folks tend to do in this type of environment is move to a more asynchronous model. And that's not as good as building connections. So if you are having to do that because of the disparate time zones, it's important to make some time where you do have an overlap of the schedule, even if that means some people stay late, and even that means some people stay early or get up early to get on the calls. there is value from having that time when you're all on a call, all in a video call, and you are sharing together. And then you're kind of going your separate ways. One leaves for the evening and one starts their day working on their things. This idea of having different time zones to consider also kind of extends to people who are working in the same time zone, but might have flex hours. You might have somebody on your team who says, well, I really just want to work 6 a.m. to noon or whatever, or 2 or whatever the 8 hours would be. And if that happens and you're still even further offset from somebody in a different time zone because of that shift, that can be a challenge as well. So again, find a common time, come together at least a little bit in the day. This is really important for the connections. It's important for your daily Scrum if you're doing that. All of these things will really help build the connection, even if it's just for a few hours a day. All right, let's talk a little bit now about hybrid environments, right? So it's one thing if I and everybody else on my team is working remotely and everybody signs on to their computer and they go into their Zoom or they go into their Teams call or whatever it is, and they've got the slides of everybody. They've got a little rectangle for everybody on their screen. It's very easy for us to see everybody. Everybody is sort of surfaced to us in Brady Bunch style, right? And so we have this connection, this communication channel to be used in that manner. And we have that understanding of, yeah, they can see me, I can see them. Somebody shares a PowerPoint or shares a desktop or shares a Visual Studio for doing some coding or something like that. Yep, we can all see it, or nope, nobody can see it for the most part. And there's a connection there. If you have a hybrid environment, then you have maybe people sitting around a room looking at a screen, and you may have people joining online. And oftentimes the people in the room forget that there's people on the call. They'll have a side conversation, maybe important, maybe not, but then the people who are on the call kind of feel like they're missing out. I said, well, there's somebody chatting in the room, and I can't tell whether that's important or not. So again, there would be an intentionality there of saying, okay, let's try not to have any side conversations because we're trying to be inclusive with everybody on the call. If possible, try to use software where we can get people's cameras, everybody who's remote, up there on the main screen with the presentation, so that the people in the room who are sort of naturally reading the faces of the folks around them and their non-verbal communication language can do that for the people that are joining online. It's really important to invest in this type of thing for your organizations. If you do have a hybrid team, there's tremendous value that comes out of it. People feel connected. They don't feel that they're cut off. They don't feel like a second-class citizen just because they have to be remote. The one other point I'll make on this is that you'll have a lot of natural chatter when folks come into a room. Anybody who's gathering for a meeting, generally you'll chat about the weather, how was your weekend, how's your family, how's your dog, that sort of thing. Again, the online people, in this case, might miss out on that. So allocating a few minutes of chatter for this before the meeting starts can really help build those communications. To expand on that latter point, even a good bit more, the casual conversations have gotten lost. The idea that we're going to get up from our side-by-side cubicles and walk to the meeting room. We may have a chat about something that, I went camping over the weekend. Oh, cool, I went to this football game. Those sort of things really get lost in the online world. So you have to be a little bit more intentional for this. You can make space for this and time for this in some of your other channels. You can send emails around asking people for maybe their favorite recipes. You could solicit feedback for the upcoming company meeting. What kind of music do you want to hear when you're walking into the meeting? You can use a near time channel for this and maybe set up some channels in Teams or Slack for folks to share restaurants nearby that they like to go to, or talk about sports or something else like that. And these water cooler conversations can be brought into these channels and into these mediums in such a way that again, people feel connected. And going back to what I opened with about the idea of these casual conversations, I was talking to one of the webcast producers right before about this particular slide, and he was saying, yeah, his family used to have a family dinner. Very casual conversation, builds the connections. And those of you who have had that family dinner on a regular basis, if you ever go to a friend or family and they maybe grab their food and watch TV, you kind of maybe feel the absence of that a little bit. So the idea of having these ways to come together, and a meal is a very intentional way to do it, right? In the real world, using the channels that we have, asynchronous, near time, and real time, and making space for that can really add a lot of value. It's also really useful when you're trying to welcome somebody who's just joined the organization. Think about the last time you joined an organization. You might have been introduced with a quick tour around the cubes. Oh, this is so-and-so, this is so-and-so, they work in this department, and that's it. You may have been handed some business documentation. You may have been given some technical information to review. There's a term for that when you're brand new to a team. They say you're drinking from the fire hose. There's just so much information coming at you. And you may not know who to ask for about a particular thing. You may not know as much about your new coworkers to feel that you have those connections and that comfort level of being able to reach out when you maybe need some help. So one of the things you can do in the remote world, and I've seen this done, is when you have a new person joining the team, carve out some time that is just to onboard that person. Set up a 15-minute call and don't talk shop. Just go around the room. The person, can share stuff about their personal life and hobbies and whatnot. And then everybody else can share as well. And when you allocate that and put it into a nice time box, that builds those connections, starts building that trust, not related to anything about the business or technology or the job itself. It's just people meeting people. And those connections help people feel a little bit more welcome than they would if they were just thrown into some stuff and given some stuff to do. There is a really interesting approach to staying connected called liberating structures. Give a shout out to that. It really is a set of ways to interact that is not a constrictive kind of structure of just the only way to run a meeting. And there's a variety of ways to run liberating structures. One of them involves, you maybe pair up some people and they ask each other questions, and then you come together as a group and say, okay, what did you learn from the other person? That is a technique. I think that's a liberating structure. If not, it's still a favorite technique of mine. But these sort of alternatives to sort of top-down, really structured meetings can do wonders for helping people build connections and learn about each other and speak up. It lets the introverts kind of speak up a little bit, and people get to know each other and brainstorm, and they creatively engage. It really eliminates some frustration that can happen from more traditional structures for meetings. And I've got a call out for this in our resources slide at the end of the presentation today. I see a question out there. I'll go ahead and jump in and answer it. The question is,
I was waiting for a good time.
Okay.
But this is actually perfect because it's online meeting fatigue.
Go ahead, yes.
One question is that sometimes team members do not answer their Outlook invites to calls and meetings. What would be the best way to approach this? I have mentioned this in our retrospectives, but some people just don't like confirming or not to Outlook events.
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, that's sort of that, I'm going to hold the thing open, or, I'm not sure I can commit to that. So there's potentially an underlying trust to that. Maybe there were situations before where there were a lot of meeting invitations that came in and the meeting got canceled, or it wasn't necessarily relevant for them to be there. We've all got an invitation to a meeting and we sign in and we're like, this doesn't really involve me. So those kind of experiences could lead to people sort of avoiding meeting requests, a fear of committing. So maybe look at some of those underlying issues in the organization and the team dynamics. But yeah, it's a bit of a challenge for this sort of thing. And maybe the meeting then is not necessarily the right channel, right? It could be, let's hop on a quick Teams chat Is everybody free now? Okay, cool. Let's just chat this out in 5 minutes and maybe we can go from there. So it could be an sort of over structuring of the communication that's needed and the connections needing to be formed, perhaps using the wrong channel. So hopefully that helps. But it also, lends itself to this, right? A great segue into online meeting fatigue. This is a real thing. I'm sitting in a chair, I'm looking at 3 screens. I've got lights around me here, and my eyes are getting inundated all day with pixels, and I just want to see a face. I just want to see a real face. And there's this tendency to just let the meeting carry on, but it really can impart some psychological stress to folks. And then, people are more exhausted at the end of a short workday online than they would be if they were in an office and were able to move from room to room and maybe hit the lunchroom or something, or, take a walk outside. A lot of times folks will do that, and the weather's getting nice. I live in Atlanta. So hey, let's go for a walk outside. We're going to chat this thing through. When it's all focused on the screen, that fatigue is a real thing. So it's important to allow for breaks, probably more frequently than you realize. And it's also important for you to have the courage to say, look, I feel like I'm zoning out a bit on this meeting, and I really want to give it my full attention. You guys are important to me. The project's important. The company's important. It's valuable for me to be able to be from a headspace that is focused on the meeting. So can we take a 5-minute break? So having the courage to step up and say that, instead of just kind of faking it and then circling back, and I don't remember what we talked about for the last 5 minutes. There's an honesty in that, and that builds greater trust, because people say that to me, it's like, oh yeah, okay, they're interested in what I'm saying and they're being honest with needing a break. It's tremendously valuable, and it makes for a great connection. Sometimes if you do need to step away for a break and you come back to the meeting, you can reach out to a colleague, message that colleague and say, okay, what did I miss? I had to sneak out at it. There's a package delivery. I had to let the dogs out or something like that. And maybe that's not necessarily fatigue, but it is that call away to do something else in sort of that home environment. Yeah, great question. Great segue. Thank you. All right, so another thing, since we're talking about online meetings, let's try to keep those cameras on, right? Because if you had started this presentation and I'd been this, how engaged would you have felt? How connected would you have felt with me? You don't know what I'm doing. I could be checking email, could be checking my phone. But if my camera's on, then you have this opportunity to connect and read my nonverbal, body language. And I'm also trying to bring my presence as well to this webinar, but of course to the meetings that I'm in, to stay engaged. Folks that are conducting a meeting and looking at those squares, if they see faces that are just looking away, looking down, you get a little dejected from that. So make sure that you're conveying your interest if you're interested. And again, if you have that tune out thing and you feel it coming on, have the courage and honesty to say that. This mimics the presence of being in person, but it is still different. When you have those screens, all those boxes, you may not necessarily have the same vibe that you have from an in-person meeting, but just pay attention to that in yourself as you're working with folks. Okay, there we go. Let's talk about conflicts. We talked about communication and connection, where things are generally pretty positive. We're working in a productive way. We're advancing the product. We are accomplishing something in our sprint retrospective, right? We're feeling a success. But I'm going to suspect that you have been in a meeting, an online meeting, where there's been some sort of conflict. So the first thing to realize is that conflict is not necessarily an argument. Conflict is good. Conflict means that folks are bringing their best ideas. Sometimes they are rubbing against each other a little bit, and they're not necessarily staying in sync, but it allows people to feel that they have choices and they can select them. And what's interesting here is that sometimes traditional organizations kind of squash conflict. They try to limit them by reducing choices, like, can't we all just get along, right? But in the long run, reduced choices will lead to decreased productivity and quality, because real innovation, real brainstorming lives in respectful conflicts. And this goes back to one of the first slides I had about individuals and interactions and the Scrum values of honesty and trust. Working together when we have these conflicts and resolving the conflicts builds a stronger team and also results in more innovative ideas emerging from all those conversations and conflicts. And again, this is where when you have your cameras on, you're able to work through that conflict, through that nonverbal communication in such a way that it doesn't feel disrespectful. These conversations that you have as part of these conflicts really fuel are fueled by the emotional aspect of it. So if I feel like I'm being disrespected, it's very frustrating. So when my teammates, hypothetical teammates, and we're having a conflict, if I can see the other person, it gives me more of an opportunity to empathize and sympathize with them, see their point of view, as we work through these conflicts. If necessary, things may get challenging and you may want to take a time out. Again, this is easier to do in a physical room. You might say, okay, get everybody to take 5, let's get some coffee. The people that are having the conflict, if some people are not being as respectful as we would hope in a professional environment, you may have to step out and have a conversation with them. That's a little bit more difficult in an online space. So you may need to actually stop the meeting itself and then, resume and have a quick video call with that person, and then everybody comes back together. So again, conflicts can be of a challenge in remote teams. Conflicts are good in general, arguments are not. And it takes a while to get used to the best practices of these virtual connection tools and channels like Zoom and Teams and stuff for these things when they come up. So having those lines of communication, having ones that work with conflicts, how do you know they're working? Check with the team. Get real feedback. Who knows best about how productive and connected the team feels? It's the team. It's the people on the team. Get their ideas, talk to them, talk to a group, talk one-on-one. If you are a participant on the team, raise up your feedback. A sprint retrospective is an excellent opportunity to do this in your organization if you're doing Scrum. But even if you're not, the idea of taking the feedback, trying something new, seeing if it works, if not, tweaking it, that is an experiment, that is empiricism, and that's going to lead you to better communications. People might say, hey, there were a lot of emails sent out last week. They probably could have been, a Teams chat or something like that. Or we really didn't need to gather in person in Zoom. We could have solved this through a couple of instant messages or something like that. So that feedback then can shape the direction of the organization and the folks in the organization to maybe picking a better channel or, leaving their cameras on if that's been requested a little bit more, which hopefully it is automatically in the organization. But any of this feedback can be used to improve the way that the team communicates and connects. So speaking of the sprint retrospective, there's quite a bit of opportunity for bringing these asynchronous, near real-time, and real-time communication channels into the Scrum events themselves, right? So if you think about sprint planning for a 1-month sprint is time boxed at 8 hours, basically a full day. And going back to the concept of Zoom fatigue, that's rough. You don't necessarily want to be staring not only at pictures of folks and tiles on your Zoom screen, but also, a user story or a mock-up for some UI, and just, working through all that and trying to learn it and as part of your sprint planning, that can be exhausting. So break up your sprint planning, take more frequent breaks than you think. The conversations in there are going to be significant because, again, Scrum and Agile are very collaborative. People are trying to understand the requirements, they're asking questions, they're brainstorming the tasks that they're going to do, they're negotiating the scope of the sprint. So all that happens in sprint planning. There's lots of things to inspect. So again, break that up, to do it in a more effective way. Another thing from Scrum related to the channels, the mechanisms, the communication mechanisms, is the daily Scrum. I've seen teams, especially when you have the time zone disparity, they're like, just skip the daily scrum, post your update in the Teams channel. Oh, that kind of misses the point of the daily scrum, which is not a status update. It's an opportunity for the team to get together, inspect their progress towards the sprint, and make some adaptations, right? That involves conversation. That involves the real-time communication. So hop on that daily scrum, don't skip it. Inspect your sprint backlog, inspect the work that you're done, identify your impediments. Don't just answer the 3 questions, but actually really look at the work that's coming, the work that's been done, and how you're going to get done for the sprint, and collaborate as a team. So again, that should definitely be using the real-time communication channels. In your sprint review, remember your sprint review is not a demo, so there's a real tendency in the real world to have sprint reviews be a show and tell, where everybody in the room is quiet and there's 1 or 2 people doing demos. That's even easier trap to fall into when you're just online, because you can turn off your camera and you're watching somebody demo some stuff. But in a real sprint review, it's a collaborative working session where you discuss, you inspect the increment, you decide what to do next, you adapt the product backlog, right? That's all interactive real time. So again, cameras on, conversations, trust, potential conflicts, empathy, bring all that, and you'll have a really good sprint review online. Retrospective as well. Retrospective can be a source of difficult conversations. The team is coming together to, find out how successful they were in the software development process, in their process of working together. That's very meta, right? So be encouraging, right? Foster honesty in those sprint retrospectives. Again, a lot easier to do, number 1, if it's a real-time channel, like a video call, and number 2, if your cameras are on. And again, pulling all these things from the real world space into the virtual world space maintains the purpose of them and the values of them and the value that they add, but just adapts it to new channels, which again is not automatic. It requires some intentionality. So a few more slides, we'll wrap up, and then we'll take a few questions. Here's some useful resources. These are great for not just online teams, but they're especially useful for online teams. Tasty Cupcakes is a really cool site. It was put together by a couple of folks in the Scrum community. One of them is Don McGrill, who's an improver, and I think he has a talk actually later this month in the Agile month that we're holding. And it is a site, is a source for games and techniques and approaches for retrospectives, get to know each other kinds of things. These are some games that you can reach for that will not feel forced. A lot of the structures of these are very casual and they're fun. And the last thing you want to do in your team is have a game that feels forced. It's like, well, why are we doing this? Well, Scrum says we should, collaborate and get to know each other. So these are some very interesting activities for folks to do. So that's pretty cool. If you're looking for specific advice around Scrum and Agile in general around distributed teams, go to the scrum.org forum. That's here. It's a second link. And just put in, remote teams or distributed teams. Take a ton of blog posts where people have other techniques and advice for working in this new world of work. Again, here's a call out to Liberating Structures, which I mentioned earlier. And then a really cool book for your retrospectives. This is a throwback to many years ago. Agile Retrospectives, Making Good Teams Great. Again, if you've read it, you may want to reread it with the perspective of moving to more of an online world, as we have done in the last 2-3 years. So just to wrap up, again, I will reiterate, connections matter. Build those connections, you're going to form trust. Trust is the engine behind a team's success. These connections require intentionality, especially in the distributed and online only world. Take advantage of those tools, but do it in such a way that you are fostering those communications to happen. Set your status, incorporate some time for getting to know each other in a casual setting to build those connections. I'll also call out that yours is not the first team to be distributed, which is again why I put in a reference to scrum.org and some of the other resources. It's a common problem, a common experience to be in, a common environment to be in is this online virtual world. So don't just read necessarily, also contribute. If you find techniques and approaches and attitudes and things that work for your distributed team, feel free to contribute those back to the community. Those types of things are always welcomed. And I'll just leave you with the fact that the effort is worth it. When you build a connection with your team and your teams build a connection with each other, it makes it worth signing onto your computer each day. Not another day of Zoom meetings, but I get to connect with these folks. We get to build something cool and do it in a fun way. And, you know, we're going to be able to have side conversations about, oh, I went to the beach this weekend. Cool. What'd you see? Saw fish. I don't know. So, you know, these things are really going to empower your teams, and it makes people basically want to be there. So there's a lot of resources for you. Improving also offers some coaching for teams, distributed and on site as well. So that's another resource. But again, it's going to pay off in the long run. So, and with that, I will wrap up and say thank you. I am glad to have connected with you today. And if there's any questions, feel free to type them in. And here's my LinkedIn information. Feel free to connect with me there.
Yes, as you can see, currently there is no questions. Please type them in if you have anything, guys. Well, while we're waiting for questions, I'll give you guys about a minute or two. I'd like to remind you all that it is Agile Month. Next week, we'll be having Chris Wickett speak on another piece of the puzzle, learn portfolio management in an Agile world. Same time, same link.
Cool. I don't see any questions coming in.
All right, then I hope you all have a great day, and I hope to see many of you next week. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.